Good morning, everyone. This is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and we need to have a serious conversation about what is currently unfolding across Quebec, because Environment and Climate Change Canada has just escalated this situation to an orange level alert. And for those of you familiar with their warning system, you understand that orange doesn't get issued unless we're looking at conditions that pose significant and imminent risk to public safety and will cause major disruptions across multiple sectors of daily life. We are dealing with a historic lake effect snow event that has already begun as of early this morning, and the intensity and persistence of what's developing here is frankly remarkable, even by Quebec's robust winter weather standards. I thought this is not your typical January snowfall. This is a meteorological setup that occurs maybe once or twice per decade in this region, and it demands your full attention and appropriate response. Let me get right into what's happening at this exact hour because time is critical here. The fundamental meteorological setup involves a powerful Arctic air mass that has swept down from Hudson Bay over the past 48 hours. And this bitterly cold air, we're talking about air temperatures currently sitting at -22 Celsius in numerous locations across southern Quebec, is now moving directly across the relatively warmer open waters of the St. Lawrence River and several major Quebec lakes. That temperature contrast between the frigid air aloft and the comparatively warm water surfaces below is creating an absolutely textbook lake effect snow machine. And Environment Canada's meteorologists have been tracking this development over the past 18 to 24 hours, with increasing concern about the accumulation totals we're going to see before this system finally exhausts itself sometime Friday evening. The official warning zone encompasses a substantial portion of southern Quebec, and I want to be extremely geographically specific here, because where you are positioned relative to these lake effect bands makes all the difference in the world between what you're going to experience over the next 36 to 48 hours. The communities located directly downwind of the St. Lawrence River, we're talking specifically about areas extending from Quebec City northeast through the entire Charlevoix region, continuing into Saguenay and portions of the Côte-Nord. These are your primary impact zones where the heaviest accumulations are either already occurring as I speak or will develop and intensify through the daylight hours today. Environment Canada's latest bulletin, issued at 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, specifically highlights these regions as facing the most severe conditions, with snowfall warnings that were initially yellow yesterday now upgraded to that orange alert status based on the projected accumulation totals and the rate at which this snow is going to come down during the peak intensity periods. Now let's talk about the numbers, because this is where you really begin to understand why authorities have moved to this elevated warning level and why I'm emphasising the seriousness of this situation. The forecast models, and we're looking at strong consensus between the Canadian GEM model, the American GFS system, and the high-resolution NAM3K that specialises specifically in lake effect events. All of these different modelling systems are converging on snowfall totals in the heaviest precipitation bands reaching 30 to 35 centimetres. That's 12 to 14 inches for anyone thinking in imperial measurements, and we're talking about that entire amount falling within a compressed time frame of roughly 24 to 30 hours. The snowfall rates during the peak intensity periods, which Environment Canada expects will occur primarily this afternoon through tonight and continuing into Friday morning, could reach 3 to 5 centimetres per hour in the most intense bands. When you're receiving 2 inches of snow per hour, visibility drops to near zero extremely quickly. Road crews cannot keep pace with accumulation no matter how many ploughs they deploy, and that's the kind of condition that makes any travel not just difficult or inadvisable, but genuinely dangerous and potentially life-threatening. The lake effect mechanism at work here is being supercharged by several meteorological factors that are all aligning, unfortunately, at precisely the same time. First, the fetch, that's the meteorological term for the distance the Arctic air travels over the open water, picking up moisture, is exceptionally long right now because ice coverage on the St. Lawrence River remains well below normal for late January. We're looking at extensive sections of the river that would typically have substantial ice formation by this point in the winter season that are instead mostly open water, and that extended fetch allows the air to pick up tremendous amounts of moisture before it hits the shoreline and rises over the terrain where that moisture condenses and falls as snow. Second, the wind direction is absolutely optimal for lake effect development. So with northwesterly flow at around 40 to 55 kilometres per hour at the surface, strong enough to generate significant moisture uptake but not so strong that it tears apart the snow bands before they can organise and intensify. Third, and this is really amplifying the situation substantially, we have an upper-level trough positioned just right to enhance lift as that moisture-laden air encounters the elevated terrain of the Laurentian Highlands and the Charlevoix Mountains. That orographic enhancement, the additional upward forcing provided by the topography, is going to squeeze even more precipitation out of these bands beyond what the lake effect alone would produce. Looking at the current radar and satellite imagery as of 6:15 this morning, we can already see well-defined snow bands that have set up overnight and are basically stationary over the primary impact zones. This is the characteristic signature of lake effect snow. These elongated bands that form parallel to the wind direction and then just sit there, training over the same locations for hours on end like a fire hose of snow pointed at specific communities. The communities positioned underneath these persistent bands are the ones that will see those 30 to 35 centimetre totals, or possibly higher, while areas just 20 or 30 kilometres to either side might see substantially less because they're not directly in the heaviest precipitation corridor. That's the incredibly fickle nature of lake effect snow. The gradient between heavy snow and moderate snow can be unbelievably sharp, sometimes occurring over a distance of just a few kilometres, which makes this type of event challenging to prepare for if you're near the edges of the forecast impact zones. Environment Canada's confidence in these forecast totals is high, and that elevated confidence is reflected in their decision to go to orange alert status rather than keeping this at yellow. The meteorologists at Environment Canada don't take that step lightly. Orange represents a situation where significant impacts to daily activities and infrastructure are not just possible or likely, but expected with high certainty, where travel will become hazardous or impossible in affected areas for extended periods, and where people need to adjust their plans accordingly, or risk finding themselves in genuinely difficult and potentially dangerous situations. The specific wording in their bulletin uses terms like dangerous travel conditions expected, and near zero visibility at times, and heavy snow persisting for extended period. And those aren't casual descriptors chosen for dramatic effect. They're indicating conditions where being on the roads during the height of this event poses real and substantial risk to personal safety. The timeline we're working with has this system intensifying progressively through the daylight hours today, Thursday the 30th. As we move through the morning hours into early afternoon, those snowfall rates are going to ramp up significantly, and by mid to late afternoon, we're expecting the peak intensity to develop across the impact zones. That peak intensity is going to persist through the overnight hours tonight into Friday morning, which creates additional hazards because overnight road maintenance becomes more challenging, with reduced visibility for equipment operators, and visibility issues become even more dangerous for any motorists in darkness. We're looking at significant snowfall continuing through most of Friday, though the intensity should gradually diminish as we move through Friday afternoon and evening, as the Arctic air mass begins to modify slightly and the temperature contrast weakens. The total duration of significant snowfall for the hardest hit areas is right around 36 to 40 hours from initial onset to final conclusion, with the most intense 12 to 18-hour period falling from Thursday afternoon through Friday mid-morning, when conditions will be at their absolute worst. Temperatures during this event are going to remain brutally cold, which has several important implications for how this snow behaves and accumulates. We're looking at daytime highs today only reaching -15 to -17 Celsius in the impact zones, with wind chill values making it feel closer to -25 to -30 for any exposed skin. Tonight's lows are forecast to drop to -22 to -25 Celsius, with wind chill pushing toward -35 in some locations, particularly in more exposed areas. That extreme cold means the snow that's falling is going to be the very dry, powdery type that blows and drifts easily with any wind. With sustained winds at 40 to 55 kilometers per hour and gusts potentially reaching 70 to 80 kilometers per hour at times, we're going to see significant blowing and drifting snow that will make actual accumulation depths highly variable over short distances and will repeatedly cover roads even minutes after ploughing occurs. Road crews are going to be fighting a continuous and largely losing battle during the peak hours against both fresh snowfall and redistribution of snow that's already fallen. And that's something they're well aware of and preparing for, but cannot entirely overcome when rates reach the levels we're expecting. Let me address the specific regional impacts in considerably more detail, because your personal experience is going to vary significantly based on exactly where you're located within the broader warning zone. If you're in the Quebec City metropolitan area, you're positioned on the southwestern edge of the primary impact zone. You'll definitely see significant snow, likely in the 15 to 25 centimetre range for most neighbourhoods, with the potential for locally higher amounts if one of the heavier bands sets up over the city for an extended period. The Charlevoix region, particularly communities like Baie-Saint-Paul, La Malbaie, and areas along the north shore of the St. Lawrence through that region, you're right in the bullseye for the heaviest totals. The topography in Charlevoix provides that additional orographic lift I mentioned earlier, and the orientation of the terrain relative to the northwest flow is just about perfect for maximising snowfall accumulation. 30 to 35 centimetres is the solid forecast for that region, with the distinct possibility of isolated locations seeing even higher amounts approaching 40 centimetres if everything aligns just wrong, or just right, depending on whether you're a snow lover or snow hater. Moving northeast into the Saguenay region, the communities around the Saguenay Fjord, including Chicoutimi, Jonquière and surrounding areas, are going to see substantial impacts as well, with totals in the 25 to 30 centimetre range expected across that region. The Côte Nord, particularly from Tadoussac, extending northeast along the north shore, will see the lake effect gradually diminish as you move further from the primary moisture source, but you're still looking at significant accumulations of 15 to 25 centimetres in many areas along the immediate north shore. For those in more interior locations, areas away from the immediate lake effect zones, but still within the broader weather system, you'll still see snow from this event, but totals will be more in the 10 to 15 centimetre range, which is certainly significant enough to cause disruptions, but not the historic amounts we're seeing in the primary bands. Now, I need to talk seriously about what this means practically for anyone who needs to move around during this event, because the transportation impacts are going to be severe and potentially dangerous. Route 138 along the North Shore, Route 381 through Charlevoix, Route 170 around the Saguenay region. These major transportation corridors are going to see periods of extremely poor to zero visibility, snow-covered roads despite continuous ploughing efforts, hot and hazardous driving conditions that will make travel times completely unpredictable at best and impossible at worst. Environment Canada is explicitly stating in their warning that travel should be avoided, if at all possible, during the peak of this event, Thursday afternoon through Friday morning, and provincial authorities are strongly echoing that guidance. We've already seen Société de Transport de Québec announce that they're moving to enhanced snow protocols, which means potential service delays and route modifications. VIA Rail has issued advance notices about possible significant delays to rail service through affected areas, and Quebec's Ministry of Transportation has pre-positioned additional equipment and crews across the region. But they're being very clear in their communications that even with maximum effort and all available resources deployed, keeping roads clear during the peak snowfall rates is going to be exceptionally challenging, if not impossible, during the heaviest bands. For those who absolutely must travel despite the warnings, the guidance from public safety officials is straightforward, but absolutely critical to follow. First, if you're going out, you need to have a complete emergency kit in your vehicle. We're talking comprehensive winter survival supplies, including blankets, food, water, flashlight with extra batteries, first aid kit, phone charger, small shovel, sand or kitty litter for traction, candles and matches. Given the extreme cold we're dealing with, exposure becomes life-threatening very quickly. So being prepared for the possibility of being stranded for several hours is not optional paranoia, but essential preparation. Second, tell someone your route and expected arrival time, and check in regularly so someone knows if you don't arrive as expected. Third, keep your fuel tank at least half full at all times throughout this event. If you do get stuck or stranded, you need to be able to run your vehicle periodically for heat without worrying about running out of fuel. Fourth, reduce your speed substantially from normal winter driving speeds. We're talking about conditions where even experienced winter drivers need to slow to 30 or 40 kilometers per hour on highways during the heaviest snowfall, and even slower on secondary roads. And fifth, if visibility drops to the point where you cannot see the road ahead clearly, or you lose sight of the vehicle in front of you, the safest action is to pull off carefully and completely. Get entirely off the travelled portion of the road if possible, turn on your hazard lights and wait for conditions to improve, rather than trying to push through zero visibility conditions where you cannot see where you're going. This event is particularly notable when you place it in proper historical and climatological context. Quebec certainly knows snow. This is not a region unaccustomed to winter weather or unprepared for significant snowfall. But lake effect events of this magnitude and persistence are relatively rare even here. The combination of the extended open water fetch, the extreme cold of the Arctic air mass, the favourable wind direction and speed, and the orographic enhancement is creating a near-perfect setup for exceptional accumulations. When you look back through the meteorological records at significant lake effect events in the Quebec City to Saguenay corridor, you're talking about maybe 1 or 2 events per decade that reach the intensity and duration we're forecasting for this current event. Please make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have notifications enabled so you receive immediate updates as I post new information throughout this ongoing and evolving situation. Share this information with anyone you know in the affected regions who needs to be aware of what's developing. And most importantly, stay safe, stay warm, stay informed, and stay put, if at all possible, until this system moves through and conditions improve. We'll get through this together. Quebec knows how to handle winter weather, but this particular